Hello, everyone. Welcome to Non Sequitur. My name is Kyle Curtis, joined always by Steve McRae and Frankie Wolf. Hello, guys. And then two very special guests tonight, Michael Jones from Inspiring Philosophy, and of course, Matt Dillahunty. How are you guys doing?
Good.
Yeah, I'm
Excellent. So we'll just go through a couple of upcoming shows real quick, and then I'll formally introduce these guys and then throw it over to Steve for the discussion tonight. Tomorrow at 8 o'clock, we will be doing the 10 questions that no atheist can answer. That will be with KC, who is Godless Engineer's better half. And then on Thursday, Godless Engineer himself will be here to have a discussion with Christian anarchists at 8 o'clock on Did Jesus Really Exist? Man, Myth, or Legend? Friday, we were going to have what we were supposed to have yesterday, which is the discussion between Dr. Cy Gart and Dr. R.M. Huffman. Both are theists, but they have differing views on the creation of mankind. So they will be joining us Friday at 8 o'clock. Okay. First up, Michael Jones is a Christian apologist that runs Inspiring Philosophy Ministries, a nonprofit with the goal of building the world's largest apologetic video library. He's been with us before. He actually had a discussion previously with Godless Engineer on the historicity of Jesus. So he's back. Thank you for coming back. And then, of course, we have Matt Dillahunty. He is an American public speaker and internet personality. He was the president of the Atheist Community of Austin from 2006 to 2013. Matt has hosted the Austin-based webcast and cable access television show, The Atheist Experience, since 2005, and formerly hosted the live internet radio show, Nonprofits Radio. He is also the founder and contributor of the counter-apologetics encyclopedia, Iron Chariots, and its subsidiary sites. Excuse me for that. A little tongue-tied. And now I'll throw it over to Steve, who will introduce the topic for discussion, and we will get going.
Hey, welcome, buddy. This is going to be an awesome discussion tonight that we've all looked forward to for about a month or two, actually. The topic going to be tonight is going to be on, is religion a positive influence in society? Taking the pro opinion is going to be Michael, which is also known as Inspiring Philosophy, and taking the con is going to be Matt Dillahunty. Both people have agreed to have an opening statement for about 5 minutes, and I believe, IP, did you want to go first on that? And then we'll have Matt.
It's up to you guys. It doesn't matter to me.
Yeah, go ahead and go first. Do your opening statement, then we'll allow Matt to do the same. And then have, again, like we usually do, is a free-form organic conversation. And if things kind of get stagnated, or if you guys kind of start talking past each other, we'll kind of like jump in and then go from there. Sound good?
Great, yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah,
take it away.
I'm really happy to have this.
And by the way, welcome back to the channel.
Oh, thanks for having me back. I love coming on your channel. I think you guys are great. But for this topic, I do think it's really important because there's a lot of misinformation about this particular topic in the media and popular culture. I mean, a lot of atheists today, specifically new atheists, have argued that religion is, and I've heard this used, poison or like a virus in society that must be eradicated so humanity can leave behind our Bronze Age superstitions. So worded something like that typically. However, most of the time these claims are made with little evidence or no evidence to back it up. So within the past years, I've been surveying scientific literature. I did a video on this a long time ago, and I have found little to no evidence that intrinsic religiosity, I'm using that term specifically, that intrinsic religiosity in regions with high Judeo-Christian beliefs is actually harmful, or it's not harmful for society or mental health or anything related to that. In fact, the overwhelming majority of papers published on the subject have found that intrinsic religiosity is beneficial for increasing well-being and ethical behavior in most people. Now, there have been studies which have found no correlation. Some have found an inverse correlation, but the overwhelming majority have found strong positive correlations. So singling out variables like intrinsic religiosity is obviously not the easiest thing to do when it comes to studies. And there will be times when there are individual studies with sample sizes that go against the general trend. But again, the overwhelming majority of studies do find positive results from intrinsic religiosity. In fact, we luckily have numerous meta-analysis studies which show intrinsic religiosity does increase ethical behavior and overall well-being. If you're unaware, meta-analysis specifically looks at every study published on a topic and gives the overall general trend from numerous different studies to show strong positive correlations between two different things. So, for example, a study titled "If You Love Me, Keep My Commandments," a meta-analysis of the effects on crime and religion, found that religion deters crime. The average effect size was 0.12 of an inverse correlation. A study titled Religion, Spirituality, Physical Health in Cancer Patients, a meta-analysis, found religion helps the physical health of cancer patients. Another paper from 1997, the Religious Orientation Scale, Review and Meta-Analysis of Social Desirability Effects, found intrinsic religiosity tends to correlate with desirable variables like mental health, altruism. However, extrinsic religiosity correlates with undesirable effects like prejudice and non-marital sex. Another paper from 2003, Religiosity and Mental Health, a meta-analysis of recent studies, which was an analysis of 34 studies conducted during the past 12 years, found strong correlations between religiosity and mental health. So I listed a whole bunch here, else I could sit here for hours and just list the numerous studies which show this. So when we look at the data, this is pretty clear that religion overall has strong benefits for society and people in general. Intrinsic religiosity has been shown in numerous studies to be extremely beneficial. Things like reducing suicide, increasing health of cancer patients, reducing crime, decreasing divorce, increasing grade point averages in Black and Hispanic students. So when prominent atheists make the claim that religion is poison or a source of depression, division, or problems in society, they commit what psychologists call an attribution error. A paper in 1995 titled Accountability, a Social Check on the Fundamental Attribution Error, has pointed to the existence of a systematic bias in the person perception process, a pervasive tendency on the part of observers to overestimate personality or dispositional causes of behavior and underestimate the influence of situational constraints on behavior. In other words, what they're basically saying is psychologists note people tend to misplace the cause of harmful behavior, and this is titled an attribution error. Psychologist Amranos Amaragasian, probably butchering that, has specifically called out new atheists for this very fallacy when attacking religion. The fact of the matter is numerous studies show religion is beneficial for modern society, and calling it poison is not backed by the overwhelming amount of scientific data. So just to wrap up what I said, I specifically am not going to, or just a couple smaller points, I'm not going to deal with studies to try to measure intelligence, because those are riddled with problems, like relying on IQ tests and SAT scores. I realize there are exceptions to the general trend. I think Matt's a pretty good person. I'm not going to accuse him of being a nihilist or a communist, like some people who've caught into his show have done. Okay, so obviously there are marginal errors. There are exceptions to the general trend. But however, the evidence shows there is a strong evidence that intrinsic religiosity in countries where there's high amounts of Judeo-Christian beliefs, that it is overwhelmingly beneficial for society.
All right, thank you, Michael. So Matt, by the way, thank you for joining us tonight as well. Welcome to our channel, the Non Sequitur Show.
Sure, thanks. I'm glad I could be here.
And we're going to give you the same amount of equal time to have your opening statement, then we'll start the actual dialogue.
Okay. So is religion a positive influence on society? Yes. I was.
All right, let's go home now. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, people.
I think it's easy to say yes for anything like this. The issue is it a net positive? I mean, because my primary concern is not whether or not religion can be a positive effect or can have positive effects on society. It's whether or not it's true. But when we talk about whether or not religion has positive effects, it would be very easy for each of us to sit here and cite different studies. I can go back to the Journal of Religion and Science study that I've been referencing from Gregory S. Paul for years that shows that on every major societal factor, it's negatively correlated with increased religiosity. And when we talk about things like, the crime rate there, I would agree with Mike that there are atheists. I don't really use the new atheist label, but there are certainly atheists who like to quote about, how underrepresented atheists are in prison and all these other things. I think there may be an attribution error in the studies as well, in the other direction, because if someone who reports that they are more religious is less likely to commit a crime, how do we know that religiosity is in fact the motivating thing there? How do we know that it's not having a good family structure, a good social structure, a good community that you're living in, where it's true that churches build communities. They also build hospitals and universities. They do things to help the homeless and other things. And those are certainly positive effects. My view is that those are positive effects of caring people, and they may credit it to their religion. I don't necessarily see that the religion itself is properly attributed as the thing that is doing good, because when I look at the broader interactions that we have in society, Oh, religion's built hospitals. Yes, but you can build hospitals without religion. And when you have religious hospitals, what you find quite often is that in many Catholic hospitals, for example, they have their religious doctrine trump medical science. And so you'll wind up with a woman who's not a Catholic who has a miscarriage, and then they force her to come in and have a funeral, not just for the miscarriage, but for the afterbirth as well, because that's birth material. And this is potentially traumatic. When we talk about religiosity and mental health, the societal influences, the having a community, having people who support you, certainly that is good for mental health. But having doctrines about demon possession, having doctrines that make people view themselves and who they are and who they're born with, oh, I was gay, I'm trans, whatever, and religion says that I was wrong and born wrong, that can be incredibly traumatic. Universities that teach good reading and writing but bad science, which is sometimes the case when you have religious schools, religious homeschooling thing where there's no oversight and they just teach like anti-science in some of them. There's no denying that religious teachings can inspire people, can give them hope, although I think there's a good argument to be made that quite often it's false hope. We might as well, in many cases, be having a conversation about whether or not beer has a positive influence on society. It's probably true that it does. I'm not a huge fan of beer. I'll drink a beer on occasion. There's some that I like, some that I don't. It's certainly done stuff to, make some groups tighter knit and add some fun to party, but it also contributes to alcoholism and a number of other things. For me, when I look at this, if I'm going to figure out whether or not something is a net influence, I think the best course of action is to say, okay, we have this entity, be it a hospital, a university, whatever, a community, and it is founded or based around a religious ideology. If we were to remove that religious ideology, would that university, hospital, or community be as good or better? And I think in many cases, we'd have to acknowledge that that's the case. And for a lot of religious people, their complaint when these things are raised is, and I'm not accusing Mike of this, I'm just saying that this is what happens. They will say, but that's those other religions. That's the religions that got it wrong. We've got the right one. And I don't know how we may make that determination, but I have yet to be presented with any sort of positive effect on society that can only be achieved with religion, and that couldn't potentially be achieved just as well, if not better, if we removed religion from it.
All right, excellent. I'm glad you actually brought that point up about the if we could remove religion, will we still get the positive benefits? Actually, a lot of the studies I cited do single out these variables. I mentioned intrinsic religiosity. This is actually important because a lot of these studies don't actually measure religion in society. They measure different types of religion. The three main categories you'll see in a lot of studies is extrinsic religiosity, intrinsic religiosity, and quest religion. Quest religion is just spiritual seekers. They don't really hold organized religion. Extrinsic religiosity is people who go to church or are part of a religion because they want to be part of a social group. They want the extrinsic connections. They want to just be part of a group. Intrinsic religiosity are people who are religious because they want to believe in God. They want to hold to the tenets of their religion. Just about every study I can find on this, and a lot of the studies I cited, noted these differences. They note that the benefits come from intrinsic religiosity, not extrinsic religiosity. For example, there was a study a couple of years ago which Salon tried to argue shows religion encourages racism. Well, I read the study when it came out, and I went to the tables and I looked at all the variables, and it showed that no, intrinsic religiosity decreases racism. Extrinsic religiosity is what increases racism. In fact, there was a negative correlation about 0.7 with racism and intrinsic religiosity. So when psychologists do these studies, like for example, Dr. Tony Jack, for example, they'll note they do separate out these variables. The benefits are coming from the actual intrinsic beliefs about God and their religion and whatnot. You cited the Gregory S. Paul study. You brought that up in your debate with Matt Slick, and I had to find it because you didn't cite the title, but luckily I found it. And I did read that study. It's one study. It doesn't actually call in any sample sizes. It only looks at certain countries where secularism is high. It doesn't pass the normal probability plots test, which is sometimes called the fat pencil test. It only looked at general plots of nations, did not single out religiosity, and did not take other variables into account. Plus, it doesn't really tell us what is the cause. Is it because some psychologists I found have speculated, does first world countries with increased technology, does that actually increase secularism, or is secularism causing the benefits of society? So it doesn't actually look at that. And for example, there have been other studies. Like, for example, there was a study done in Czech Republic, Germany, Holland, Greece, Hungary, Israel, Italy, Mexico, Poland, Portugal, Spain, Switzerland, Turkey, the U.S. And it was called Values and Religiosity, a meta-analysis of studies using Schwartz model. Found across these 21 countries, a lot of the countries where the secularism is happening, that religion was positively correlated with being respectful, helpful, responsible, self-disciplined, honoring parents and elders. The correlation was 0.45. So when we do single out religiosity, even in these countries, we do see positive correlation between intrinsic religiosity. So just saying, well, we can take religion out and we still get the hospitals, we still get the positive benefits. That's actually been looked at in a lot of these studies, and it always shows that extrinsic religiosity is actually causing negative correlates to a lot of this ethical behavior and overall well-being, whereas intrinsic religiosity is what is increasing the ethical behavior.
So let me see if I can phrase. I have no idea how you can properly distinguish between extrinsic and intrinsic. I do understand, I come from, a Southern Baptist background, and we were well aware that there were people in the church, hey, they're Sunday and Easter Christians, or they're going through the motions. And, the Bible talks about that there are people who call me Lord, Lord, and I never knew them, et cetera. So this seems to be kind of like the intrinsic religiosity is suggesting that we can get to what people truly believe and what their motivations are. The problem is it intrinsic Christianity that has a benefit, or is it intrinsic Christianity, or is it just a broad, if you believe this is the case sincerely, and you're not just there for the social stuff, you are less likely to do these sorts of crimes? Because I'm not denying that if you convince someone that if you steal, God is going to mess you up, that can be a motivation for people to not steal. My issue still, of course, is whether or not it's true. But I also think that you could still convince people not to take those actions without appealing to the religious thing. So I'm not sure how you distinguish intrinsic and extrinsic, because in many cases what we've seen is somebody is generally considered what would be a sincere, intrinsic, true Christian right up until the point where they, their sexual proclivities are paraded before the church and they're ostracized. And now all of a sudden, okay, well, they didn't actually believe it. It seems kind of self-affirming.
Well, first of all, I forgot to mention previously, Matt, if you don't drink beer, we can't be friends.
I will have one on occasion. I think I like Paulaner Oktoberfest, but I'm doing iced tea right now.
I drink whiskey with every debate.
There we go.
All right. Well, first
that
of all,
I can do.
Well, if you come to Tucson, I'll take you to a great whiskey place.
Awesome.
So first thing I want to note is it's how do we distinct between intrinsic and extrinsic? First of all, science doesn't deal in proof. We deal with what is most probable. A lot of these studies, they draw people in, they ask them very subtle questions. They get an idea. Sometimes they'll ask friends. Sometimes they'll look at medical records, statistics, and whatnot like that. My wife and I, when we lived in Pittsburgh, we participated in one of these studies, and we had no idea what the study was about until the end, because they were very good at hiding these subtle cue markers, using people coming in who were not actually doing the study. They were, like blind type studies. And so there's actually a lot of interesting ways they go about doing these. But a lot of them do reach the results that it is the cause of intrinsic religion. For example, there was a study, Religion and Completed Suicide, a meta-analysis, which found that, they actually said that the meta-analysis suggests an overall protective effect of religiosity from completed suicide, with about an average effect size about 0.38. So some of them are, there's a lot of work that goes into trying to conduct these studies. It's not like guys sitting around going, let's go out and ask a bunch of people who here's religious. Great. Who here
understand that.
No one's doing that.
I know. I hate that. I understand that. I'm saying, I know that you can ask subtle questions to get to what people actually believe, but there's another layer to this. If person X, because they've been taught by their religious organization, thinks that suicide is immoral, they sincerely believe that. I'm not saying it's difficult to sort out whether or not they sincerely believe that. It is that belief in their head, which will probably decrease the chances that they're going to kill themselves, is it directly because of a particular religious doctrine, or are they convinced of that alongside a religious doctrine that, you could get rid of the fact that the church says suicide is immoral, and they would still maintain that belief for reasons other than it was in the Bible or a pastor taught me?
Well, based on the evidence, and again, it's not proof, it's based on probability, but based on the evidence, it is intrinsic religion which is causing these positive effects, which is overwhelmingly associated. I mean, the meta-analysis I cited on crime looked at 60 different studies with all different types of sample sizes, all different types of experiments to conduct. The overwhelming amount of evidence shows that it is what is the positive correlations. It is these actual beliefs. We can speculate that it might not be, but the overwhelming evidence is leading us to that general conclusion.
I still don't see how we can create a causal connection here. I certainly see how we can see a correlation here, because if I believe that it's good to go out and help the homeless, it doesn't matter whether I came by that belief through religious indoctrination or a holy book or through some other thing. The fact that I believe it makes me more likely to go out and do this. That is about what the individual believes. I don't know how we tie that to religion as a cause any more than saying, I first learned about this, in kindergarten. Therefore, if you go to kindergarten and you have to play with other kids, that, reduces this. It's about the idea and the belief. And certainly, religions have had kind of like a privileged position in society. It's tax exempt status. It's the de facto, hey, you move to a new town, you can come to our church. And there are secular communities and secular humanism, other ethical views that haven't had nearly the time or the benefits to try to establish those same things. So I'm fine with the idea that a religious teaching can instill an idea in someone's head that can make them a better person. So on that front, I've already acknowledged that, yeah, religions can do good. My issue is more like, is religion a requirement to get to that point? Or can we encourage people to be good and perhaps even be better if we, don't begin with a religious ideology? Which may not be the subject of the debate, but I just wanted you to know what my objection was.
Well, that's fine. Yeah, that's not really the subject of the debate. I mean, for the subject of the debate, I would say that if you agree, then you agree. It's like, that was basically what came prepared to say. But if for your argument that we would need to see if we could get, I would want to see some studies done on this. There's not actually been that much, and I was trying to look pretty hard to find some sort of study that I could look that would say, can we get these benefits without religion? As far as I can find, the studies I have read, like the one on religion, delinquency, drug use, crime, self-control, a lot of them argue that the religion is what is directly the cause. Obviously it's not proof, as I've said numerous times, but it does show that if you do remove the religion, these other things, these bad behaviors will go up based on their analysis.
I don't buy that at all, because
that's what the studies say at the end of the day.
Well, then they're mistaken, and here's why. To say that in all these instances where someone is wet, we saw that it was raining. And then to say that if we remove the rain, people won't be wet. That is essentially the path we're going down with this sort of argument. Because I'm looking at this as there are good ideas that we can put into people's heads, and religion can, in fact, put those good ideas into people's heads. But when I look at, is religion a positive influence on society, it's not just can and does religion, and I guess we'd have to pick out which ones we're talking about, put a good idea into somebody's heads. Is that the best way to put an idea into somebody's head? And are religions also putting a lot of bad ideas into people's head alongside those good ideas? Because if we're going to say, is it a positive influence on society? And it turns out that, yes, it has positive influences on society, but that on the whole, it's a negative, that, it's divisive, or when the baggage that comes along with these good ideas, that to me is where I'm going to have to kind of draw my line on, is it a positive influence on society? Because if all we mean is, does religion, and this is the weird thing about religion and religiosity, because we're always talking about people. We're talking about people taking actions and then attributing it to their religion. in many cases, it is, I took this action because I am sincerely convinced that this is the best course of action. And you could be convinced of that through a religion, whether it's true or not, through many different religions, and they can't all be true. Or perhaps there are methods by which we can encourage those same ideas without a religion. And so like I said in the opening, if I'm looking at religion and whether or not it's a positive influence, I think one of the tests would be to remove it. And you're implying or saying that the studies say, it looks like when we remove this, the good benefits go away, except that hasn't been the case. When we haven't removed religion, and we don't have the sort of samples we would need to look at and say, here are a group of people who were never influenced by religion, or here are people who had religious foundations replaced by secular humanist foundations. The only thing that they can really look at is, here's people who self-identify intrinsically through questions and extrinsically as religious, and here's people who don't, and look at their behavior. But it's not somebody in the talk that I did with Jordan Peterson the other day. I suggested that, there's never actually been a secular humanist society for us to use as a sample set for this sort of stuff. And he mistakenly said that, yes, there was Soviet Russia, which I beat him up over, because there's no way you could say it was an atheist state, but you can't say it was a secular humanist state because those values aren't there. So it seems like we're kind of conflating. We have a society that's primarily religious, and religions certainly do instill good ideas into people. And I would think everybody would agree that religions also instill some bad ideas in people. Now, if all we care about is it instilling something good? I mean, I hate to go, I'm sure Jeffrey Dahmer loved his mom and did something nice at some point, but, I don't know that would qualify him as a good person.
So if you're arguing possibility, not probability, going back to your rain analogy, if we saw a bunch of people wet, sure, we don't know, it doesn't prove it's raining, but it does show it is far more probable. Again, I'm arguing that this is far more probable based on the data I presented. I mean, on a whole, it seems to show that it does show the positive benefits. And, people have studied religious versus irreligious. For example, Dr. Tony Jack, he has looked at non-religious people versus religious, and he has found that with non-religious people, that it's far more likely that sociopathic tendencies tend to arise. Empathetic intelligence does drop in those sorts of things. So we do actually see that with regards to that. And then we do actually, so people have looked at it, not as much as we've not gotten to the point where we've gotten a lot of meta-analysis, like we have focused on specifically intrinsic versus extrinsic religion. But we have seen some studies going in that direction. So, I mean, I don't know what to tell you. Again, I'm just going to be arguing from the data itself. If you're going to be arguing, well, we haven't had a full secular society, we can't really measure it. Well, we have to go on the data that we have in front of us.
Well, I understand.
Data shows that intrinsic religion does increase ethical behavior on large scales. At the end of the day, it does show that the net gain does show religion is far more beneficial than anything else. I mean, I could compare it to pet ownership. You could take pet owners. Pet ownership does increase overall well-being, happiness, joy in life, although sometimes pets do bite people and in fact have killed some children. Just because there is some bad things with pet ownership doesn't mean all pet ownership is bad, or that doesn't show that the net worth or the net gain is worse.
Sure. So I think I understand we have to work with the data we're working with, but what I'm talking about is the way the data is being portrayed. When you see, for example, the study you were talking about where we take a look at non-religious people and sociopathy is increased in that population. That doesn't tell you whether a lack of religiosity somehow increases sociopathy or whether sociopaths are less likely to be religious. The fact that and I would argue that we're probably, in many cases, when we're talking about sociopathic tendencies, we are probably not talking about as often how much somebody was raised or how somebody was raised, that there are probably genetic factors that contribute to mental defects in sociopathy. So if it's the case that the overwhelming majority of sociopaths are non-religious, that is not an effect of being non-religious. That is, it's not like people gave up religion and became sociopaths. We don't have evidence that that sort of thing happens. And when we talk about the net gain, when we look at these studies and they say, we are only looking at factors X and Y, and perhaps not Z, et cetera. How do you measure the harm done by convincing LGBTQ people that they are somehow broken and born bad? How do you measure the harm done of refusing, having doctrines that oppose condoms, which we know are a good thing, which would go a long way to reducing unwanted children, which would also reduce crime, which would also reduce the tendency for the sociopathic or the psychological damage that comes along with being in an unwanted child situation or an unhealthy situation, and the STDs that go along. Merely having this one little doctrine, hey, we're opposed to condoms, has this cascade effect that produces massive amounts of negativity that aren't particularly measurable. And even if you and I were in agreement that this is a bad idea, I don't know how you stack this up. And I don't judge people or religions on some kind of scale of, oh, well, you donated this much money, but you're opposed to I don't do all this to say people are good or religions are good. I tend to go a little bit more discreet and say this action that you took was bad or this action that you took was good. That's why I can say that, yeah, religions have done plenty of good things. Actually, I would probably say that people have done good things on behalf of their religions. That these ideas that instill good ideas in people, those ideas were still created by other people. Somebody had that idea. I mean, you can still do this sort of encouraging of thoughtfulness and care and stuff without appealing to anything supernatural or holy, just on the basis of who we are.
Okay, so well, if you can't measure, then how does that help your case? If you're admitting that you don't think we can measure a lot of these things or argue for what's more probable, then I don't see how that would actually help your case, because that would just be an admission that you don't know and we're just throwing our hands up in the air and guessing.
No, I'm not. Well, first of all, I'm not claiming that religions are necessarily more harm than good. I'm just saying I'm not convinced they're doing more good than harm. And some of this is going to come from samples and interactions that are not the sort of data that I could present to anybody, which is why there's not a study. When I'm looking at kids being thrown out of their homes, when I'm looking at the anti-trans hate and anti-gay hate and abortion laws and TROP laws and all these things that are commonly associated with religious views and religious doctrines, that's a whole lot of bad. Now, is it enough bad to outweigh any good they've done? I don't know, but I do know, or I'm convinced, to be fair, that we can have a hospital that does not adhere to any religious doctrine, and it will be better than a hospital that does adhere to religious doctrine, because the hospital without religious doctrine will be purely based on good, sound medical information and will not be adding in doctrinal things that are in opposition to science. So the hospital has to be better.
Well, it has to, but there's no real data to back that up, that somehow you remove the religious factor, that's better. In fact, going back to the data, the overwhelming amount shows that intrinsic religiosity does actually increase overwhelming benefits and whatnot. And again, I don't really care if you're not convinced by this. You can believe whatever you want. I'm going to go on what the data and what the science says at the end of the day. And the most best explanation of this data is that intrinsic religiosity does increase overwhelming benefits. If we're just going to throw our hands up because, well, we can't measure, but I can look at one religious hospital and one that's not religious, and I know that non-religious hospital is better. We don't know that. I want to see an actual.
We do know that. We do know that. This is the thing. If you're claiming that a religious hospital is better than a secular hospital,
I'm actually not claiming that.
Well, I mean, if religiosity is a positive influence on society, wouldn't a religious hospital be better off than a secular one?
Well, it depends on what the studies would say. We actually think the data.
That's one of the things is what are people defining as good or better? Because there are plenty of people who think that banning abortion makes the world better. And I would argue that they are absolutely wrong. But there are also people who think that, having these religious ceremonies for the afterbirth after a miscarriage is a good thing because they're appealing to their God. And yet I would completely disagree that this is a good thing at all. They are traumatizing a woman who just suffered a miscarriage. And if you remove that religious aspect from that, and just go with the science, just go with the medicine, my argument is that is better, in much the same way that the law is better off when we stopped allowing spectral evidence.
Well, for one thing, I mean, with a lot of these hospitals, I mean, you're making a lot of assumptions. Them, because you know, for preparing for the bed, I spent more time reading studies and looking at these random cases. But if we're going on that, I mean, that's assuming a lot of things without any actual psychological data to back it up. I mean, this is sort of like comparing weird things. As far as I've seen, most religious hospitals still do medical procedures. It's not that they're somehow saying, well, we have to pray instead of doing these. They're not somehow replacing medicine with like religious stuff. They still have doctors. They're still doing a lot of things. They're still doing a lot of good around the world. A lot of them are nonprofit for that matter. But again, that's really not the conversation.
But the good that they're doing is not in any way tied to the good that a doctor does. The good that a doctor does when they're following sound medical procedures is in no way tied to a religion. It's just science.
Right. I'm not denying that at all. And the religious hospitals don't prevent doctors from doing that.
Oh, yes, they do.
There's a huge amount of background noise from.
Okay, I'll try to fix that.
So there are hospitals that are preventing medical procedures that other doctors would do on the grounds of religious objections, right down to abortions, even in cases where the life of a mother is at stake. These sorts of things happen. By and large, every day at the Catholic hospital down the street, there's far more good being done than harm. I'm fine with that. But the good being done has nothing to do with religion or religiosity. It has to do with science and medicine and people going there to get a paycheck and help people. And you don't need religion for any of that. And when you add the religious component into it, it seems to me that you are at a, how does it improve anything to add religion to medical treatment? I see plenty of areas where it detracts. I have not seen areas where it actually improves, apart from someone who's already religious having a chaplain of their preferred denomination come in and speak to them, which I'm not at all opposed to, because that is extra medical. I mean that is in addition to medical, not super medical. That is treatment. That is a psychological aspect. In much the same way that when I was in the military, I wish there weren't a chaplain service that was, paid, et cetera. But I understand that if you're going to put people in military and they come from different religions, you're going to need to make sure that they have, as part of their rights and individual freedoms to practice their religion, someone there to counsel them, someone from that.
Okay, well, again, I still want to press this matter. If a lot of these hospitals are not doing medical procedures, it's not like they're kicking them out. A lot of them are sending them to other hospitals, for example. If someone has a religious objection to performing an abortion, that's something different, separate, entirely different. And you asked what good would be doing taking their, could we still have the good without their religion? Again, a lot of these hospitals are still doing a lot of the medical work. They're not denying the medical procedures. They're still doing the surgeries. They're still taking in patients. Just because they may have an objection to an abortion does not mean they're denying patient care. And again, It goes back to these studies on intrinsic religion. That does show overall increased benefits. The topic tonight is not, are religious hospitals better than non-religious hospitals? The topic tonight is religion beneficial? So I don't understand. I mean, how does it improve? I mean, intrinsic religion does actually improve overall.
So you're wrong in the sense that first of all, if they have religious objections to performing a procedure, saying that they will send a patient to another hospital ignores the truth about the situation. In most places around the world, apart from large rural areas, you have exactly one option of where you're going to go for medical treatment, just as you have exactly one option of where you're going to go to get your pharmaceuticals fulfilled. And so if the pharmacist doesn't want to provide you with the prescribed contraception, they're putting themselves ahead of the doctor on the basis of religion. And now we have added an undue burden to the individual. And in some cases, refusing these sorts of treatments has resulted in death. Now, is that the de facto standard? No, and I'm not denying that they do these other surgeries. But A hospital that treats the whole patient, that actually acts responsible with regard to medicine and medical ethics without injecting the religious doctrine, I would think that would be better than one that injects the religious doctrine and says, oh, no, I realize you're in pain and you just came here, but we can't treat you. We have to send you somewhere else. Because even though there's a medical procedure we could do, our religion prevents us from doing it.
Yeah, well, first of all, I don't know how that helps your case. That just points out that a lot of Christians and different religious groups have put hospitals in places where there are no hospitals. So they've clearly increased the benefit. They've clearly created far benefits for that society, whatever. And again, what data shows that they're throwing out these countless numbers of patients on the side of the road. It just seems like you're citing these marginal cases which don't affect the overall general trend of what's actually going on here.
Except that the marginal cases are based entirely on religious doctrine, and all the cases that you want to cite as good have nothing to do with religious doctrine. Treating patients that show up using proper medical procedures is not a religious thing. There's no requirement of religion. So let's say there's 100 procedures that this hospital does, and there's 99 that this other hospital does. Now, if all of them are medically sound, and one of them is not being performed for religion, then 99 of those have nothing to do with religion. And the hospital that's refusing to do the one, the only effect that religion is having on that hospital is denying treatment to that patient.
Not necessarily, considering that it was intrinsic religion, which has caused increased ethical behavior and for many religious people to go into the world and put these hospitals in those places. Again, it goes back to the motivational factors we have here. We're talking about if religion has actually increased benefits in society. It has increased its ethical behavior. It has caused people to want to go out and cause more charity. Every study does show that that's the case. So
hospitals aren't charity. Hospitals are not charity. Hospitals are a necessary component of life. Doctors are getting paid incredible amounts of money because they study for years and they go in and do this. You want to talk about medicine as charities, you can go out and talk about Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders and stuff like that. The average hospital in the community, this is not a charity effort. This is essential public health services that needs to be regulated by a government and based on sound secular science.
Well, first of all, that's a political view.
Yes.
And again, we're not talking about politics. I'm pointing out that a lot of the reasons these areas have hospitals is because religious organizations saw a need and they went in there and they fulfilled it because they were motivated by their intrinsic religious beliefs, basically. So I don't see why jumping to politics is going to change what I'm trying to say here.
Okay, if I'm motivated by my intrinsic religious beliefs to build a hospital, and I profit from it, and I deny medical coverage to people based on my doctrine, is that better or worse than I'm motivated to do good in the world and I build a hospital and then I provide sound medical treatment?
Well, first of all, a lot of those hospitals are nonprofits. Well, I don't see what you're trying to say here.
I think he's
I have
asking you.
motivation to do good. So I create a hospital and I rely on sound science without letting my personal religious convictions trump science. Versus you have a desire to do good and you build a hospital and you allow your personal religious convictions to trump what sort of treatment people can get. Which of those two situations is better?
Okay, this is a weird hypothetical, and I don't really see any sort of what examples are you trying to draw on here?
It's not a weird hypothetical. It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I don't
Situation
see how.
number one, a hospital is built with the purpose of doing good because a community needs a hospital. And that hospital makes all of its decisions based on the best sound medical advice and understanding out there. Hospital number two, somebody was motivated to do good and they built a hospital. And instead of just relying on sound science, they also inject their religious doctrine in there, which ends up denying, let's just say, one patient coverage and treatment. Which of those two is better?
Okay, this is quite a setup question. How are, as I said before, what examples? How are they denying treatment? In what ways?
How about you ask it this way? Which one's more altruistic and which one is more restrictive? Is that okay?
It depends on what they're doing. I mean, you brought up, for example, I think you're going back to the abortion thing. So that's a completely different argument. I don't even know if I want to open that can of worms right now.
Well, tough. It's relevant. You don't just say I don't want to open.
Well,
that
I'm
can of
pro-life,
worms.
so I'm not going to side with the idea that we should kill an unborn baby. So I'm not going to agree with you on that. And again, if you want to open that can of worms, fine by me. But I don't see how that's going to help your case, because that's just going to open pro-life, pro-choice arguments.
But it's not just that one thing. It's also denying condoms. It is also putting women who have miscarriages through the stress of having additional funeral services for afterbirth.
Okay, what studies show that people that go into religious hospitals are coming out with stress because they're giving funerals to miscarriages wherever this is happening?
Sorry, what?
So what studies show that people that go to religious hospitals are coming out with more depression and more stress because some random nurse is having some sort of funeral for their fetus? I'm confused.
It's
where
not a random nurse. You see, you don't get to dishonestly label this as a random nurse. This is hospital policy. I have a friend who works at a local hospital who files these reports all the time. Is there a study showing that women are leaving more traumatized? I don't know if there's a study, but considering I've actually spoken to the women and the people who counsel them that they're leaving more traumatized, would you at least acknowledge that at least one woman has left more traumatized because of this?
Well, again, for the same reason I would acknowledge that sometimes pet owners have pets that bite them, and there are risk factors with everything we inject in society. Just because there are marginal cases, that doesn't show religion has overall caused more problems than it has caused good.
What is the sound medical policy or positive benefit of forcing a woman who just suffered a miscarriage to have a funeral and a bill for that funeral for the afterbirth?
I'm not saying that's a good thing, and I'm definitely not saying that's necessarily the dispensational cause, as I cited in my opening points.
Is it okay? Is it a bad thing?
Is what a bad thing to have a thing? I don't think it depends on what the mother would want in that case.
Okay. Clearly, I'm talking about mothers who did not want this, mothers who were not a part of that particular religion, are now forced to go through a funeral procedure for an afterbirth and pay for that as well, because that's the hospital's policy. Is that better or worse than the hospital that doesn't do that?
Okay, yeah, clearly that's bad. I'm not saying that you should force mothers to do that, and I would like to see some actual data that show this is happening on very large scales.
It doesn't matter what the scale is. It doesn't matter what the scale is. The point here is that a hospital that does not inject religious doctrine doesn't do that. And a hospital that does inject religious doctrine does that. And so everything that what we've added here is bad. There's nothing about the medical science treatment of patients that comes from religion.
Yeah, and a lot of these hospitals acknowledge that. Just because they may do some weird stuff after, that does not mean that's actually, they're somehow replacing that with medical stuff. I'm confused about what this has to do with actually showing that religion, intrinsic religion, has actually sort of not caused benefits.
It goes back to his question, Michael. Is one better than the other? You know, that's the original question that he asked you. Is a secular hospital that does not have these practices ultimately a better choice than the one that chooses to, based on religious grounds, force you to have to go through that?
Yeah, he's asking you, is there any value added by adding the religious aspect to the hospital?
It depends.
Is that correct? Matt, is that okay to word it that way? That you're asking if any added benefit? Okay.
It depends on the type of religious aspect they're adding. He's citing this one weird case that I have seen no data happens on large scales. And he's saying, see, religion's bad. Whereas I'm pointing to all these studies which show that intrinsic religion does actually increase beneficial behaviors.
Yeah, I don't think that's what he's saying. And I don't. I mean, I know you're not trying to purposely strawman him, but I think what he's saying is if there's even one case where religiosity has that effect over a hospital which has no religiosity, then it automatically has a net negative effect, because it doesn't matter if there's one instance or a million instances. The hospital that doesn't have the religiosity won't have any of those things. Is that correct?
Matt?
So the issue was, how do we determine whether or not religion is a positive influence on society? Because I'm happy to acknowledge that religions have had positive impact, but I don't find that to be particularly compelling, because the issue isn't can something, I can have a positive impact with a lie, and I can also have massive negative consequences with that as well, and I don't think we would necessarily call that a good thing. If the only question is religion a positive influence on society? I said yes at the outset. My point is that that's a terrible question. It's like saying, has this mass murderer done anything good? Yes, surely they have. And so when I want to go through and figure out is, how do we figure out whether this is a net positive or not? And at the end, even if it's a positive, I mean, my primary concern is whether or not it's true. But I think when you look at, I think the studies that look at intrinsic religiosity to say, it contributes to, reduce crime rates and all these other things. I don't think they're looking at the whole picture. And I don't think that we are in anywhere near a position where we can have good studies yet on the whole picture, because there are religious doctrines, some of which I have no idea what, I've never met Mike. I didn't know what things he ascribes to or not, but to call a policy of the Catholic Church at hospitals fringe, it just tells me Mike's not a Catholic or hasn't looked into what the Catholics are doing. And my question at the beginning was, we have something, a church, a school, let's help the homeless. And we have one version of it that has no religion in it, and another version of it that is tied to religion. And which one of those two is better? Because when I go out under 6th Street to help atheists helping the homeless or secular humanists at work feed the homeless, the first question we get, or a common question we get, is what church are you with? Because they have in their head that if you're out here doing good, you're a church. And we always point out, nope, we're atheists, we're secular humanists. We are giving them a sandwich without requiring them to listen to a sermon first. And from the perspective of the religious individual, they think that both of those things are good. Both giving them a sandwich and teaching them about Jesus is a good thing. And yet that hasn't actually been established. So when I look at this, if we remove religion from it, what have we lost? And if we've lost nothing, or worse, if we've gained something, we've gained, efficiency, et cetera, whatever, then I don't know how one could say that religion is a positive effect, just because you can say that intrinsic religious people are less likely to commit crimes than people who aren't intrinsically religious. That is, you're not looking at the whole picture there. And so that's why I came up with this particular example. If we go out and feed the homeless, and we just do it because we care about the homeless, is that better, worse, or just the same as people who go out and feed the homeless in order to teach them about Jesus or whatever?
Well, first, you're taking it well beyond the range of the debate or the discussion based on what we're having. I mean, you're kind of starting to blend it into what's true about reality and what's not true about reality. I mean, is teaching people about Jesus would be a good thing depending on whether it's true or not. And I think we basically put aside that just to talk about, is religion beneficial for society or whatnot. As you asked earlier, what have we lost if we move the religious factor? Well, again, we've removed a lot of the motivational factors for people to do the good behavior, as the studies show that intrinsic religiosity is what the motivational factor is. You keep saying this example, like, if we go out and feed the homeless, we got to feed the homeless and also tell them about Jesus. If we remove the religion, what have we gained? Well, again, we're not talking about the effects. We're talking about the motivations here, which cause people to want to go and do a lot of this ethical behavior, which causes the increased ethical behavior. Again, it goes back to intrinsic religiosity. We're kind of missing the whole mark here when we talk about what the studies are actually showing with the benefits of religion.
Okay, so and I'm not in agreement. We can set aside all the things about religiosity, whether or not it's true. And if we just look at in a world with religion, you can motivate people to do good things. And my problem with the studies that claim that intrinsically religious people, which I've already addressed a couple of them, I'm not necessarily convinced that you can adequately tie down a causal relationship any more than you can just tie down a correlation. Because we also know that people choose what church they go to, in part based on what they already believe. And so if you've been raised by your parents to be the sort of community volunteer activist who's willing to go out and do good, whether that idea is consistent with a particular denomination, whether or not it could be viewed as an origin there. I was raised in a household that's primarily Southern Baptist and was taught certain things. I certainly believed them. Many of them I still believe, because I don't need a religious foundation for those beliefs. I don't need a religious foundation to care about other human beings. But we live in a world where non-religious people have been so maligned from the pulpit and across the board that the view is you can't get those good ideas into people's head without something like religion. I'm not convinced that that's the case, because I have watched people make these changes. We are just now in the fledgling era of non-religious organizations building communities that actually work this way. But Unitarian Universalists don't have, in many cases, a specific doctrine. And yet they would probably be described as intrinsically religious, that they have some set of beliefs that they believe. They have some set of beliefs they believe. There's a tautology.
There's no study which shows that focuses on Unitarians as far as I've seen, but go ahead.
But, well, I don't know if they would be considered in there or not. This is why I was also saying, if it's the case, and this is probably the strongest point, and so you may have studies relevant to this. If it's the case that intrinsic religiosity provides the same benefit, whether you're an intrinsically religious Muslim, an intrinsically religious Christian, an intrinsically religious Jain, then clearly it has nothing to do with the doctrines. It is something about this adherence to the social community, we are passing along our ideas. Our parents are here, our community's here, we've got this set of ideas. Because all of those religions, to some extent or another, will teach basic things. Hey, don't steal, don't kill, to some extent. Jains evidently go much further. If that's the case, then it isn't so much that religion or intrinsic religiosity is having a positive influence. It's that generally good ideas, which can exist and can be conveyed with or without religion, are having a positive effect on society.
Well, again, it's not the community. It's not just teaching the community values. They challenge this based on intrinsic versus extrinsic. When you take out the beliefs, the belief in God, the belief in the doctrines, and just focus on people that are religious for the community aspect, it is negatively correlated in every study I've found. Again, this is what the studies show.
That's not what I'm talking about.
Then why did you bring up the community aspects regarding like the
because you can be a part of a community and still honestly have intrinsic beliefs about certain things, that it's better to volunteer, that it's better to help people.
And those beliefs come from those effects come from the actual beliefs, not just the idea of
I'm a community. All effects come from beliefs.
Right.
Okay. So what I'm saying is, when we talk about religiosity, we're not just saying, I have some set of beliefs. I believe, am I intrinsically religious because I believe that it's good to help other people, that we have to share space, that we should broaden our social policies to take care of the people who can't take care of them? Does that make me intrinsically religious just because I believe those things sincerely?
What makes you intrinsically religious, according to the studies, is that you believe in God, you believe in sort of like a God is your foundation for doing good. You believe the beliefs of the religion, like, for example, with Christianity, the virgin birth, resurrection, etc. You go to church, you become a religious person because you want to get closer to God. That's the best way I can put it. Extrinsic religious people are religious because they want to be a part of community. They want to be more in the world. They want to just, go to church weeks and meet people and talk to people, go to study with other people, read things with other people. That's what it's about. So, and what you go ahead.
No, go ahead.
And so what you seem to be doing, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you seem to be saying, look, we have Jains, we have Muslims, we have Christians. And, it's not the beliefs, it's the fact that they're part of a community. It's the fact that they're doing things together, which is causing this behavior. And again, it distinguishes that.
No. So here's the thing. You define two categories, neither of which fits me. Okay? So there's intrinsic religiosity, and you're saying that is people who sincerely believe in God, and in the case of Christianity, I guess, virgin birth and resurrection. Cool. Extrinsic religious people are people who participate in their local church. The same. Let's say you and I go to the same exact Christian church, and you're an intrinsic Christian. You believe in God. You believe in virgin birth, resurrection, etc. And I'm an extrinsic religious individual. I don't actually believe in those things, but I believe in the church and in the community and those sorts of things. That's two different categories, neither of which is the category I'm talking about. I'm talking about someone who sincerely believes in doing good for its own sake, whether or not they're a part of a religious thing. I don't believe in God. I don't believe in the virgin birth. I don't believe in a resurrection. But I believe in doing good for other people, in building a better society, and broadening all these. All of these are sincere beliefs I have. I'm saying that the religious aspect, the things that you wanted to say were intrinsic religious, believing in a virgin birth, resurrection, and God, have nothing at all to do with whether or not one believes in doing good, being charitable, not killing people. And so there's some group of people, secular humanists and others, who have those beliefs of, hey, let's do good, be charitable, and not kill people, absent of any religiosity at all. They are just convinced of these, and they have a community that shares those ideals and helps to encourage those ideals in others without having to appeal to a God. That doesn't fit into either of the categories you talked about.
Right, I understand that. But for example, citing marginal cases does not somehow refute the general trend, just because this is about as convincing as if I try to turn you into a Christian by using my personal testimony. Just because it works for you, it does not mean it's going to work for everyone, and it's not going to work for the general population. The overwhelming amount of data does show, for example, studies have shown that joining a weekly recreational sport is good for you. I am a super introvert. That gives me anxiety just thinking of going out and meeting with people for more than an hour. So it probably would not be good for me. It would probably cause depression, make me tired.
I'm not appealing to outliers. I'm not appealing to outliers.
Because secular humanism is a small category. And saying, look at all the secular humanists, we can do good without it. Okay, that doesn't show that's actually scientifically backed. Just because there are marginal cases does not refute the general trend.
Okay, well, if you want to write off the bulk of secular humanism as if it's just some kind of freakish outlier, when what we're really talking about is, here's an idea. Can you communicate this idea to someone and get them to accept it without appealing to a God? Yes, you can. We do it all the time. I convince people to leave their religion and maintain good values and get rid of the bad ones all the time. So when we talk about, is religion a positive influence on society? My answer initially of yes. I would now change that and say no. Because if intrinsic religiosity is tied up into believing in the virgin birth and resurrection and God, none of those things are necessary to actually teaching someone how to live a better life and how to be a better person. So it's not the religious ideas that are good, it is the good ideas that are good. And what I've said for years now is, take the good wherever you find it, even within religions, and get rid of the rest of it. Because the virgin birth, the resurrection, those things have nothing to do with whether or not I should give somebody a sandwich or knit a hat for them or do these other sorts of good. They're irrelevant, apart from the possibility of saying, you better do this or God will stamp you out. And then what you've done is you've set up a situation where when somebody gets to a point where they don't think there's a God, they no longer have a motivation to do good. It's like having two kids at dinner who are acting up, and you tell one of them that, if you keep acting up, I'm going to beat you. And you tell the other one, if you keep acting up, I'm going to, or if you stop, I'll get you dessert. They don't behave when the parents are gone. You haven't taught them proper values. You've just given them a carrot and a stick.
Okay, again, you're basically saying, look, I've convinced people that they can be good without religion. Okay, good for you. Okay, marginal case, citing your personal experience, your personal testimony, and saying, look, I can do it without religion. Other people can too. Therefore, we don't need it. That's not a scientific basis. That's not going on what studies actually say. For example, there's a lot of people who don't believe that they would have an ethical foundation without religion. Now, I'm not going to get into the whole moral debate here right now. What I'm pointing is what they believe is that if you take away religion, there would be no ethical foundation. And the studies back that up. Just because there are some people like you and your friends and other people you have convinced, they say, we can do this without intrinsic religion. That doesn't mean that's true for society in general and for most people as well. Most people tend to say that there needs to be some sort of intrinsic religious foundation to motivate them to do these sorts of things, whether you believe it or not. Now, you just saying, yeah, I see that in society, but that doesn't actually, I see that in society, but I can do it without religion. Okay, good for you. That doesn't mean everyone else can. That's very close to arguing from incredulity.
It's very close to being monumentally arrogant and suggesting that somehow those of us who've managed to do it are better than those other people. The fact that, so the idea is this claim that we've heard forever, some people need religion. There are people who believe they need religion. There are people who believe that if they didn't believe what their religion teaches, they would run around raping and killing. I'm not convinced that they actually would. I think this is a protective mechanism from religion, because what we see over and over again from the Clergy Project, from the hundreds of ministers who are either active in the pulpit, who are left the pulpit, from the countless thousands of people who show up at atheist and secular events around, these people are not by and large any more immoral than anyone else.
Well, if it is a protective mechanism, I want to see some actual data to back that up, and it's not actually true. As far as the study showed, their actual beliefs are that, if you remove the religious foundation, there would be no reason to show that. And
But
so
you
for you
change
to
that
say, for you just to say, I don't really believe you when you say what you actually are saying, I think it's just a protective mechanism, that is completely unfounded. There's no data to back it up.
Hang on. First of all, when I ask people this, if I say, hey, if you stop believing in God, would you run around and rape and kill? There are people who have legitimately said yes. Do you think they actually would?
I honestly am not going to jump inside and psychoanalysis people.
This is not psychoanalysis. This is about which is more likely, that they are actually wanting to go out and rape and kill people, but a God or a belief in a God prevents them, or that they are so convinced of this God as a deterrent that they want to portray the idea that they would go out and rape and kill. Well, we know enough about human psychology to know that people who are in a church who believe in a God, if they stop believing, are not actually likely to run around and rape and kill people, that we have societal motivations to stop that.
This is an extreme example. Okay, most of the studies are not focusing on raping and killing people. They're just focusing on ethical behavior like self-control, psychopathic tendencies, increased crime. Sure, I don't think people are going to run around. If I found out tomorrow there is no God, I'm not going to run around and start raping people. But I don't think my ethical behavior would be exactly the same. I don't think I would really. I'd focus more on what I would want to get, and I would try to do whatever I can to possibly do that. So, for example, for you to just say, I don't believe that they would just be as good without religion, there's no data or science to back that up. You can't psychoanalyze people based on what you want to be true or what you think is true about them.
No. I'm not psychoanalyzing people. I'm looking at psychological norms of what we know about human behavior, that the people just don't. There's not that high of a percentage of people who have those kind of psychopathic tendencies in the first place. There's no, just because studies can show a correlation between intrinsic religiosity and reduced crime rate or pick your statistic, doesn't mean that we have to fear the idea that if people gave that up, that they would suddenly be worse.
Well, the studies are going further than saying correlation, as I said. I mean, for example, the study on crime, if you love me, keep my commandments, a meta-analysis of the effects of religion of crime, does go so far as to say that it does exert a moderate deterrent effect on individuals. It's not some of them going further than saying that it's just a correlation. They're saying this does deter. So for you to say, well, we can just remove that and everything will be humpty-dory, that's not entirely true.
It is, because the fact that X acts as a deterrent does not mean that Y does not. And when we have evidence that Y also acts as a deterrent, you don't get to say that we need to keep X.
We need to show data that Y is going to be as a strong deterrent. You just can't say, well, I believe it will be.
I think we've shown it enough to have good reason to not think, to be able to realize from all the people that we've introduced to secular humanism and to secular other moral systems that aren't tied to religiosity, we know that their behavior is not necessarily a threat risk. Now, when you say which is better, okay, which is better at discouraging certain behaviors or encouraging certain behaviors, I don't know how you can say that one is better when one of them has had this incredibly long, privileged de facto status in society, and the other one has barely even started running, and yet has produced positive effects.
Okay, again, I'm going to beat this drum until it dies. We need to see actual data that shows that, look, we have this meta-analysis that shows religion versus crime, but luckily we have this other meta-analysis which shows secular humanism also reduces crime. I would want to see some studies. And what you say, we know, when you say the phrase, we know, that, I mean, you're basically saying, from my experience, from the people I've converted, I have seen the ethical behavior stay the same. Okay, well, again, there are marginal cases, but you cannot make an objective claim based from your own experience. That's basically arguing from incredulity.
We're kind of going on a little bit over an hour now. I think this is kind of a good time to actually maybe address some questions, if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Some of these I have written, and I'm trying to get some from the live chat myself. I'm listening to your guys' dialogue here. So what you were just talking about, let me ask IP especially, why do not we see more people when they lose their faith? We don't see a huge paradigm shift in their ethical standards and their morality and their framework of morals. We basically see them just lose their faith and they continue on their lives as they normally do. If what you're saying is true as far as these studies, would you not expect to see people that have lost faith to have a huge change in how they go about their daily lives and live their life morally or immorally?
Well, what foundation would that be from? Where you say that I mean, are you saying that? Oh, I've seen people. Okay, well that's great. I've seen people lose their faith too, and they're really good people. For example, I have a cousin, great fan of Matt Dillahunty. In fact, he was the first person who showed me Matt Dillahunty stuff. He's a great father. He's a great husband. He's a great person. He's an atheist. So what? There are marginal cases, but overall in society in general, we have to go on what science says. We just can't say, look, I have all these friends I have from my experience. I need to see something more than saying, look. Look at this. Yeah, and again, there are people that do find other variables which cause them to get ethical behavior, for example. I'm not denying that. The question is what happens on society as a whole.
I have a problem with calling these marginal cases. I don't know what justification you can say that they're marginal cases if we're both acknowledging that there hasn't been either the time or the study to show the proper effects of secular humanism. It seems a little weaselly to just dismiss this as marginal cases. What if, as the world continues for religion to decline and the nuns, the NONEs, continue to increase, at what point do we get to recognize that it's no longer marginal? But the other aspect is, I can identify specific doctrines within religion which are harmful and wrong, which diminish the value of things, as I was talking about with hospitals and stuff. Has anyone identified values within secular humanism that risk poisoning good efforts in the same way that religion does?
Well, yeah, it's underlying. People have argued based on the underlying truth foundations that you could lead to nihilistic tendencies. Now, you obviously don't agree with that, but other people have disagreed. And I have talked to people who have become nihilistic because they become atheists.
I know lots of people who have. I'm not at all saying that that's not one of the potential outcomes.
Okay, but well, then you acknowledge there is some risk factor as well. You said there was some risk factor with religion, and here you're acknowledging there's a risk factor with secular humanism. So I don't see what you're trying to point out there.
There's nothing about secular humanist principles that leads to nihilism, but the fact that what I'm saying is that there are people who have left their religion who become nihilistic.
No, I was talking about being secular human. I'm talking about people who I've spoken to who were atheistic, secular humanists, and they became very nihilistic. They became anti-natalist even.
Sure, but you can't say that their nihilism is caused by some principle of secular humanism.
So what you're saying is that when we are studying individuals, we should look at the multifactorial variables going into them and not just assume it's one variable causing it.
That's pretty much what I've said all night.
Then that's my point when it comes to attribution errors and blaming this stuff on religion.
And I think, that was my point with regard to attribution errors, with regard to giving religions credit for that, when in fact, the good idea of, hey, let's feed the homeless is not in any way a required tenet of a religion. There are certainly...
The difference is I actually have studies showing that it is causing that sort of stuff. You on the other hand, don't. So one of us has studies, one of us doesn't. We can yell attribution error back and forth, but I'm going on what the scientific study says. This is why I cited them, gave you the titles. I have a lot of the PDFs. You can look at them yourself.
Yeah, except that there is nothing about feed the homeless that is necessarily tied to a religion, because you can do that without. So as I acknowledge, you can encourage people to feed the homeless from a standpoint of a religion. You can also do it from secular humanism. You can also do it from holding a gun to their head. You can encourage people to do things for many, many, many reasons. I've never said that even at the outset with my yes is, can it do a positive thing? I'm looking at the net and saying, when we look at religiosity, and when you're talking about intrinsic religiosity and having to believe things like virgin birth and resurrection, et cetera, my primary concern is whether it's true, but I'm not convinced that those actually produce any positive results. The facets within religions that produce positive results aren't contingent upon the religion. They are good ideas that would be good whether there's a God or not, whether there's a holy book or not.
Well, again, going back to the feed the homeless thing, yeah, of course, you can encourage people to feed the homeless through all sorts of means. The question a lot of these psychologists ask is, what's a good motivation factor to get people to do this ethical behavior? And the overwhelming support. I mean, if I'm going to give you one study to read, just read Religion, Self-Regulation, and Self-Control, Associations, Explanations, and Implications by Michael McCulloughan and Brian L.B. Willoughby from the University of Miami, excuse me. They note overwhelmingly the best motivation in a lot of these factors is intrinsic religiosity. Sure, there are other motivations to cause people to feed the homeless. The question is, what is going to be the best motivation for most people in general? And the overwhelming amount of psychological data shows it is intrinsic religiosity. That's my point.
No, this is the problem. This is the problem with the study. You can't say that X is the best method if X has been the primary method to the exclusion of other methods for the bulk of human history.
Well, they're not going over the bulk of human history. They're studying sample sizes of today. They're not saying,
you live in a world where this is the dominant method and you don't have data on the reliability of other methods. So you can't say that it's better than another one. All you can say is, based on the information we have, this produces good results, and we don't have data that shows that something else would be better. But you don't get to say that it's better.
Well, first of all, they do compare a lot with extrinsic religiosity. They also have done studies comparing with spirituality, people that are not religious but spiritual. There's actually a really interesting study on that.
I don't care about religious, spiritual, not religious, or extrinsic. This is what I pointed out. When you talk about these things, those categories are excluding what I'm defending. I am not intrinsically religious. I am not extrinsically religious. I am not spiritual but not religious. I am a secular humanist.
Again, I would tie you back to Dr. Tony Jack. He has looked at religious versus non-religious. There is some effects going on there. Again, people have looked at this. It's not as extensive. I hope there is more. I'd like to see some more results from this. So I will agree with you. There has not been an extensive amount, but there has been a fair amount up to this point. We should see some more within the next decade. It should be pretty interesting.
Should see a lot more over many decades as religions continue to die. But until such time as, and they are, that's the trend. It's undeniable.
No, evolutionary biologist Michael Bloom has noted religion is not going to die anytime soon.
I didn't say religion was going to die soon. I said as religion continues to die. It is dying out. Religion.
No, actually,
he has a study for that, I'm sure. There is a study for that.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. Let me ask this one question real quick, so we can kind of get these in before our time's up. And it kind of piggybacks on something that you were talking about, or that you have been talking about, Michael. Person asks excuse me, that was the wrong question. If the study showed that religion had an overall net negative effect on society, would you be against religion in society?
That's a great question. I would want to know if it did show. This is a purely hypothetical, of course. That would cause me to really challenge and look back at religion and see what it's doing and why it's causing these negative effects. I would probably question beliefs. I'd question a lot of truth factors. I'd question I would look at what the studies are saying, what they're showing. If it actually did show intrinsic religion was causing negative effects, then yes, I would have to question a lot of what they're saying. I'm not just going to. One of the things I try to do is try to look at the science as best I can, and so I would have to look at it. But again, this is a purely hypothetical possible world scenario. We have to go on what data we actually have in the actual world.
Anything you want to piggyback on that, Matt?
No, that's fine.
Okay. Steve?
Yeah, so let me ask you this question, because going back to the sandwiches thing, what do you think, if the goal is to feed the hungry, what do you think is more efficient? Let's say, for example, me and Kyle want to go out and we wanted to have the goal to feed the hungry. I go out and I want to just give sandwiches away. Mm-hmm. So there's no conditions. He wants to attach a condition. I'm happy to give you a sandwich if you listen to my sermon, adding that extra caveat. Which one has a higher efficacy?
Well, obviously the one who gives sandwiches.
So if my goal is to feed the hungry, why, the question then follows up, why would you need the religion to be attached to that?
So Mike, we did this, and I'll help you, Mike. Mike's view of this is, it is not about which one is more efficient. It is about which foundation serves as a better motivator to give the sandwiches out in the first place.
Right.
For example, if religiosity is a better motivator to feed the homeless, and they end up feeding 50 million homeless along with some sermons, and secular humanism only motivates us to feed, a few 100,000. Well, you could do math that way. Which one is a better motivator? And my objection to this is that you have a population that is 70 to 85% maybe religious. Some section of that is going to be the intrinsically religious who are motivated by, this is what God wants you to do, so you'd better go out and do it. And then you have a tiny portion of the population, somewhere between 1 and 14%, who would be non-religious, perhaps secular humanists, and some portion of them are doing it. But if you adjust, I don't know,
Well,
you can't even adjust per capita right now to figure out which one's more effective, because churches have had de facto privileged statuses, tax-free exemptions, the ability to buy land and keep their money secret and all these other things that allow them to be better at perhaps motivating people, which is why at the end of the day, I'm not as concerned about which one currently motivates people better. I'm concerned more about which one's true. But in an ideal world, comparing methodology A, intrinsic religion, and methodology B, secular humanism, which one actually produces a better world?
Well, to answer your question, Steve, if someone is going out and trying to say, I'll give you a sandwich if you listen to my sermon, that's bad. And most of the charities, as far as I have seen, don't do that. They say, here's a sandwich. Would you like to listen to a sermon? No? Okay, I'll move on. For example, the Gospel Rescue Mission here in Tucson does that. They gave me a bunch of cards to hand out one time because where I work, there's a lot of homeless people who, most of them, unfortunately, are always asking me to buy them alcohol at the local Circle K. And I'm not going to do that. But so I tried handing out these cards and for whatnot. But, I do agree that religious people should not be saying, I'll give you a sandwich if you listen to my sermon and let me read the Bible to you. I don't believe that's a good thing in any way. And I don't think a lot of religious people even do that. They would say, here's a sandwich. Would you like to hear the gospel? If not, don't worry about it. We have a mission. We could take you in. We could try to help you. But if not, here's a sandwich.
I would agree. I
agree with that too.
That would probably be overblown. It was for the purpose of analogy and with regard to efficiency. And since we talked about motivation instead of efficiency, it's kind of irrelevant.
Yeah. Well, I think that we're kind of be wrapping this up. We are going close to the 90-minute mark, which we all agreed upon. So let's start closing statements, closing arguments, and what you want to leave the discussion with. I believe that you started first, Michael, right? So you want to close first and then have Matt close last?
Yeah, Matt can have the last word. Sure, go for it.
Okay.
A couple of years ago, there was a documentary that came out called Patterns of Evidence Exodus. And when I went and saw that, I went home, and the very first person I watched to get commentary on was Matt Dillahunty, because I didn't want to put myself in an echo chamber. I wanted to hear what the other side said. And I eventually came to realize, from reading that and on also responses on debunking Christianity and even some Christian responses to it, that the documentary was wrong on trying to redate Egyptian chronology. So I want to encourage everyone, try not to put yourself in an echo chamber. Go look at these studies I've cited. I'm not hiding anything. Go look at them. Find out what their best motivations are. See what intrinsic religion is actually doing. Look at this stuff. Don't just try to say, well, all of my friends, we are good with our religion, therefore we don't need religion. Well, that's great, but don't just try to go on what your own personal experience is. Don't go on what you're surrounding yourself with. Try to get out and see what other sides are. Try to see what psychologists are actually saying about this. A great person to listen to online is Jonathan Haidt about a lot of this stuff, or Tony Jack, for example. There's also a lot of these great studies that for example, the one I highly recommend everyone read is Religion, Self-Regulation, and Self-Control, Associations, Explanations, Implications. They go over dozens of meta-analysis studies on the effects of intrinsic religion, and they actually even show that extrinsic religion is all the negative effects associated with it. So we need to try our best not to put ourselves in the echo chamber and to try to go back to the studies, to look at the sources, see what it is. The overwhelming amount of data does show intrinsic religiosity does increase society as a whole. Even if we think we can do better without it, that doesn't actually show that's true for reality.
And Matt?
I agree. I might as well end the way I started. Yeah, it's interesting that he brought up the Patterns of Evidence video because, first of all, I'm no expert in any of that stuff. I just went through and looked at it logically and what claims were they making, and let me go out and look at some data And I agree.
Yeah, exactly. That's actually why I wanted your points, because I thought you would be a good layman commentary on it. But go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, and I'm agreed. Don't put yourself in an echo chamber. I will go out and look at the studies. But there are sometimes, and this is going to, I'm sure this is going to tweak somebody. If what the study shows is already problematic in what they were looking at and how, then the study may not make that much difference to what the rational position is. So, for example, if they're comparing intrinsic and extrinsic religiosity, those aren't the only two options. Those are just two of the options that they could evaluate, and probably fairly easily, since there are a massive number of people who identify either intrinsically or extrinsically as religious. And this was something that was apparent to me even when I was in church, that, you know, hey, there were true believers who believed the virgin birth, resurrection, et cetera. And then there were people who came to church. I am not advocating for belief and belief. I think both types can encourage good. I think that perhaps intrinsic religiosity, which I think is what the studies are showing, may be better at encouraging this behavior than extrinsic. And I think that has a little bit to do with the character of the people involved. If you're an extrinsic religious person, you're going for benefits other than the sincere belief. But the beliefs that are actually encouraging the good actions, I don't see that they're tied in any way to religious doctrine. You can have a religious doctrine that says, sell your belongings, give the money to the poor. Christianity has that. Curiously, Christians don't tend to actually do that in large numbers. But you can certainly encourage good behavior that way. Is it possible to encourage good behavior without the religious baggage? And how much harm does the religious baggage actually do? We may not know. It's very difficult, as I was pointing out earlier, to go through and say, hey, if our church doctrine is that homosexuality is an abomination, what effect does this have on our parishioners when they're going to go out and vote with regard to legislation? I mean, are they going to point to God has put, you know, every government before you, and or are they going to vote based on the principles that they've learned? And how is this going to impact other people? How is denying condoms, which would do wonders if the Catholic Church would just stop being anti-condom? I can't even imagine how much good they can do in the world, in addition to potentially lying about, you know, AIDS information in Africa, et cetera. When I look at this, I have to absolutely say, which is why I started with yes, religiosity can absolutely encourage good behavior. And so can lying, and so can a gun, and so can any number of things. I'm concerned with, if you remove the religion, what do you risk? What have you lost? Is the world possibly, even with a rough patch in between, going to be better if you remove the religious stuff? It seems to me that when it comes to medical treatment, religion is unnecessary to the actual medical treatment, and the religious doctrines that motivate people to do good also pollute what kind of medical treatment they're going to get. I think the same thing happens in a number of other areas. I have yet to be given a good example of what religion adds that would make me view it as a net positive. In this case, we talked, and Mike talked a lot about, it's good as a motivator to that action. And I'm fine with the idea that it is a good motivator to that action. I'm just not convinced that it's remotely the best or better than other options. And we don't yet have the data to say that that's the case. But what we do know is that people can be motivated to do good and be good, even without religion. And if there's one lie that needs to be stamped out, it's the idea that without religion, we are at great risk of becoming a corrupt society, because they don't actually have evidence for that. They have evidence that religions can encourage good, but we haven't yet got to a secular humanist society to show whether or not it can truly be better. But we at least know that some people don't need God to be good.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank you guys both for joining us. This was excellent. I think it was a really fantastic discussion. Matt, when are you going to be back with the Atheist Experience so people can check you out on your show on Sunday?
2 days ago. Yeah, I was on 2 days ago. I won't be on again until May 27th because I leave Monday to do the Magic and Skepticism tour, starting in Halifax and then moving across the United States. There's also a conversation in New York with Douglas Murray, and people are going to laugh to hear this. I have no idea who that is, really. Just a couple of notes. So I'm going to have to go figure out who this is and who I'm sitting down with and what we can talk about. But I did that for Jordan Peterson as well.
Make sure you pack your coat this time.
I'm throwing caution to the wind. One day in Halifax isn't worth packing a coat in the luggage. But I want to thank you guys and Mike in particular for both giving studies and stuff to think about, and for anybody who watched. And despite bickering back and forth, I don't think we're actually that far removed on what good is, irrespective of how we think it's best to motivate.
Yeah, I don't think you guys are taking diametrically opposite stances on a lot of things.
Yeah.
I think there's probably a lot more common middle ground than most people realize in these types of conversations.
Well, following the show, before we close out, following the show, you can join us on the Geek Room if you'd like. We will be having a debate over homosexuality, which you all know is close to my heart. So I am ready for that. That will be, Frankie, 8:30?
Yeah, 8:30
Eastern.
Okay.
Eastern Standard Time.
So join us for that. And we'll see you here tomorrow night at 8 o'clock for those 10 questions that no atheist can answer. Good night, guys.